Like if you understand that there is a network out there that carries out, awful, false flag attacks, like theoretically things like Oklahoma City and 9/11, maybe not exactly, but things of these sorts that create justifications for awful things to do. They're out here doing it. Now, it's inextricable that you then have like things like drug trafficking or things to create funds. Like people understand that, but now
because they need to bring the money. Gary Webb shot himself twice in the head right when he was exposing them.
Yeah. But what's more valuable than illegal drugs? What could be even more valuable and also maybe have dual purposes?
Human compromise and child trafficking.
Because they completely. I mean, if they have you having sex or killing a kid, they completely own you.
Guess who's with the narrative now?
You'll be like you'll be treating like Lindsey Graham.
Brother. It's the enterprise. This is where the intersection. We find ourselves at the crossroads where we witness the intersection between the occult, right, the well-established intelligence apparatus, and honestly the occult underground, but also the combination of essentially what becomes the very well-established pedophile underground as well, right? And they seemingly, as you had mentioned, by the way, could potentially be using, these various occult ideologies that, combine Satanism and satanic ritual abuse, right, as some sort of cover.
Well,
right?
yeah, because I was researching with Grok last night, and I was asking it theories, and it says it's very possible. I'm not saying this is correct. It's very possible it's using the Satanism because it sounds so ridiculous. Yeah. People will see it,
you hide
and they'll be like, "Oh, it's not happening," or they could really believe in this stuff too, though, because it's like maybe they do believe in these demonic gods.
Which I do think,
but I never really thought the theory they could just be throwing that in there to be like, "Oh, Satanism, that's like crazy."
And as we said in between these episodes, there's almost like a chicken and egg effect here. As I just kind of laid out here, the idea of like, oh, you can kind of find a way to understand this if you maybe are want to be more grounded in reality or something. The idea of like, oh, this is to create, off the books funds, also be able to shore up narratives to be able to prevent this actor from doing this thing. This is your kind of way to, but it's also, as I said, chicken egg is like, or is it the inverse? Is all of this to facilitate the act?
The occult.
Like the occult.
And I'm undecided, I'm undecided,
I am too, man.
But either way, there's something bad going on. Like, guys like, Gary Webb was investigating the CIA, trafficking drugs to fund things, a lot of it into the black communities and stuff.
Which, by the way, that was this is a recycled playbook. This tactic of kind of funding black bag operations, covert clandestine operations through this drug nexus or child trafficking nexus, which, again, it's the enterprise is what's being represented. Yeah. And that falls perfectly in line with, let's say, the Son of Sam case with David Berkowitz or the Fort Bragg murders, right, with Dr. Jeffrey McDonald, which essentially they both provide this perfect example of how, unfortunately, there are occult organizations like the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which directly tie in these groups and organizations, and also provide us with this recycled and a repeated strategy of essentially they were this. People talk about Iran-Contra all the time, right? But nobody's really discussing the cadaver connection and like Frank. So it's very interesting because the cadaver connection basically during the Vietnam War was set up through Fort Bragg, utilizing MPs, military police, but also utilizing the local narcotics division of the Fayetteville, North Carolina Police Department at Fort Bragg, for example. There were multiple military, it was far more than just Fort Bragg, obviously. And it was all up and down the East and West Coast even. And it was being very well distributed throughout the domestic United States. And so they were exploiting the Golden Triangle from Vietnam and also from I think
opium
it was
trafficking.
Yes,
part of the Afghans. Now I look at the Afghan war and I bet part of it was
recycled strategy.
Yeah, I don't have proof of that, but I look at that being like, I bet that's part of the war.
Why else do we have U.S. troops standing there guarding poppy fields?
Yeah, I can't think of any other reason.
Yeah, and then the production of heroin or opiates, and
then the Sackler family all of a sudden has OxyContin, and now we have 100,000 ODs a year.
Exactly. Now we have this huge,
I'm sure we've all lost friends to,
brother. I mean, I myself had an issue with it for a time, and then just had to at least just. obviously,
life's tough. People go through times, and it's it can be fucking hard to get off something when you do.
Very much.
Luckily, you're able to step back and be like, I gotta get my shit together, because I've lost friends. I've had other friends have a problem and then got themselves together.
I've seen it, man. I've seen people drown. They can't.
I know.
Yeah, and it's
so
one
that's
of the
why you
most
have to talk
tragic
to your
things.
friends and stuff. I had one friend who was struggling, but he would always come talk to me, and he never stole or anything. He never became a shitty person. Then he got clean. It's like if you start stealing and go down that there's no
It's
real
hard
coming back. It's hard coming back from that.
Yeah, it's
I have
really
friends that have
hard.
stole from me, and I would forgive them if they apologize. But generally, it's hard to come back from that.
Yeah, it really is. But I really think the point being here is just like the reality of the fact that you witness. Not only were the local narcotics officers actually involved in facilitating the network, you had they were utilizing the local chapter of this occult organization called the Process Church in the Jeffrey McDonald case, which is a 50-year murder case from Fort Bragg. It's called the Fort Bragg murders, is what it's called.
About this case, but.
It's very crazy, and it's my most recent. Sorry, my most recent solo episode, right, where I went like 4 hours
deep in it,
talking about this. I had no, expectation of actually covering it for such an extended period of time, but it was like once I realized, by the way, Ted Gunderson again involved in this as well.
He's someone I stumbled across recently. He's an investigator, right? An FBI investigator.
He ran the LA FBI for a time as well, and so he was very much like, and a lot of people question his credibility due to the fact that it obviously is a Fed.
Which is fair.
But which I understand, but still, how else would you have a perfect understanding of how this might, be potentially operating?
He was basically saying, I don't know if it worked that well, basically he was saying there was these networks of satanic trafficking, right?
I'll tell you right now, man, it's so crazy what he says about the finders.
I looked him up. I was hoping he was still alive, and I saw some of his videos. I'm like, wow, this guy's like...
Ted, yeah.
He's also, I think he's the one that found the tunnels on a separate
That's
case.
That's exactly what he did, yeah. So he presented that.
What's the case? The
McMartin. The McMartin preschool.
Yeah, people don't know. I don't know the details behind this one again, but there was alleged of hundreds of kids were molested there.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just
around
McMartin.
60, I think.
They all said they were brought to these tunnels, but there's no tunnels.
Tunnel systems.
They explained what were in them, the satanic rituals, and these kids are crazy, manipulated. Years later, he dug up and found 45-foot long tunnels, giant. They didn't find them all even, but these massive tunnels had pentagrams drawn on them.
Oh, yeah.
Hundreds of bones of animals. This is real shit.
So Ray Buckey, the key perpetrator in that case, right, the McMartin preschool, it turns out you have Will Bynum, who's this investigator, right? And I think it was the Manhattan or Hermosa police department at the time. And he was effectively, they murdered him and claimed it was a suicide because he was actually, the day before he was going to testify and actually discuss the details of what he discovered at the McMartin site, which was dead rabbit carcasses at one of the filled in. So they had discovered that there was foreign soil that had filled in the tunnel system.
They wanted to hide it after it got raided. Yeah,
exactly. And so that alone revealed the fact that there was a tunnel system perfectly in place. Which, by the way, the individual who ordered basically, I forget the name of the individual just offhand that actually ordered the construction of the McMartin preschool, but he had actually built that tunnel system and had it dug in before they ever actually created.
Pre-planned.
Yes,
because it just sounds so crazy. The kids we're getting brought through tunnels, sometimes flying places, doing satanic rituals. People are like, oh, that's just crazy.
Right.
Then they found the tunnels.
Yes, they did.
There was a lot. I don't know the number. There was a lot of kids saying it.
Oh,
at the
100%.
time, though, as you mentioned, I believe there was some document that came out. You correct me if I'm wrong. That essentially implied, we didn't find, essentially didn't mention the tunnels, and it wasn't until later that, much later, after it already got written off as satanic panic. A lot of people always like to point to how none of these, none of these, these did start to go to trial, and then they all just fell through one by one until there was no one applying. But you got to think the same thing, from a legal standpoint, if you're think about the chances of actually going through with prosecution with a child. Think about it, as twisted as it may be from the ultimate perspective, if you were trying to tear down the credibility of a child. Not too hard to do. But it's also the go ahead.
The False Memory Syndrome Foundation. They instantly infiltrated. So all these MK Ultra,
Jolly West probably involved in this.
Exactly. They infiltrate, the McMartin case, and they legitimately decide that they're going to undermine the credibility of the child victims.
I think it might have been hundreds even. It was so many.
Jordan Peterson had on Michael Aquino's wife at some point, didn't he?
Oh God, that's just terrible.
Yeah, that's a fun one to go look back. He completely going with the with the satanic panic narrative in that little bit. I never watched it
exactly
entirely,
what
but that's
happened.
exactly what that is.
It's easy for it just to sound crazy.
Yeah.
It just sounds so insane when you hear this stuff. But then they find the tunnels. They have the, people constantly dying, and then all the stories are the same. Like tons of these cases always mention tunnels. Like almost every case, not on everything, but a lot of times the kids remember say, "Oh, we were brought through underground tunnels." That just sounds so insane. But then, oh, here are some tunnels.
I think it was 60 children they said from McMartin. I think, somewhere in the realm of that. It
was a lot. I know
and
that.
one of which I think claimed that a Mikey. Michael Aquino, and I believe they even described his inside.
Here we go.
He was the guy who was tied in with intelligence. The church is set, right?
Yeah,
He's tied in with like all these cases. It seems like
this is the Presidio connection, right? Which ties in the West Point scandal.
I always mix
which again, Michael Aquino, it shouldn't go without being said as far as. He has military intelligence connections, and there's very much an overlapping thread that you can tie in.
NATO connections, as we mentioned
exactly.
earlier.
And by the way, he's going to the Belgium castle where they're holding the pink ballets from Marc Dutroux, the victims of Marc Dutroux. Yeah, man.
He's right there.
Yep. And by the way,
this is the case where it's 100% proven that kids were tortured to death,
And two of the victims in the Marc Dutroux case went to an event the night of their abduction where they were hypnotized live in front of an entire crowd.
No way.
I swear. And as far as that's concerned, it to me it's proof positive that because that was the night they were abducted. Yes, man.
Yeah,
so
no, it's like they said stuff you don't want to believe, but when you start seeing just too many connections, it's just like
it's absurd. And beyond that, it becomes undeniable at a certain point, and that's where you find yourself in an extraordinary position, where you have to kind of actually grapple with the fact that this is the power paradigm that we're witnessing play out in front of us.
It's true. You don't want to talk about it because it's so dark and you sound crazy, but then you start seeing all the points and you're like, something's clearly there.
I think true